and welcome to Aging Matters, a program featuring individuals who talk about aging-related issues of interest to older adults and their families. I'm Cheryl Beversdorf, your host. Today, I'm pleased to share another episode of Aging Matters TV show, Stories of Life, programs featuring guests who share the way their experiences have made a difference to them and to their community. Today, my guest is Dr. Clive Callender, transplant surgeon, professor of surgery, and spokesperson for organ donation for almost 50 years. Dr. Callender will talk about his work as a transplantation surgeon and his efforts to increase African American involvement in both organ donations and transplantations. He will also explain how he has expanded the focus of organ transplantation to include all minority populations and improve the system of organ allocation on national and local levels. So welcome, Dr. Callender, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very excited to participate.
Well, let's start from the beginning. That's always the best way to get a little bit of information about my guests. So talk about your early years. Where were you raised and what was your young life like?
I was raised in Harlem and had a very interesting beginning because when I finally got from after my mother died and I was, and we left foster homes and we went to live with my aunt, Ella Warren. I spent 5 out of 7 days of my life in church. And so that my upbringing was characterized by learning how to read the Bible and learning how to reading the Bible, learning how to do public speaking in church, singing in church, and so most of everything that I did was in church. I learned how to sing in church, and so most of my life was based upon everything that happened in my church. So that at the age of 7 in church, I realized that I wanted to become a medical missionary. And from that point on, I determined how I was going to do with my life. Outside of my church, the youth around me were excited by getting juvenile delinquency taught. But I was interested in reading the Bible, and so that characterized my earlier days. Actually, my religious background was the reason for my faith in God, which is responsible for everything that has happened for the rest of my life. And it all relates to my aunt Ella Warren and the way she raised us.
So where did you attend college, and then after that, what medical school?
I went to Hunter College in New York City. It's in the Bronx and Manhattan. And in 1959, I graduated from Hunter College with a very mediocre background. And I then attended Meharry Medical College, where I got my medical degree. And it was there that I actually recognized that I wanted to become a surgeon. And thereafter, I did a surgical residency, learned how to become a surgeon because my goal was to become a medical missionary to go to Africa and have my life dream come true.
So when you were decided to be a medical missionary, were you going to use your surgical knowledge then in wherever you were going to be a medical missionary?
Well, initially I intended to be an internist, but after I experienced the wonders of what happens after you do surgery, I decided I would become a surgical medical missionary because that's the field that I could get results more rapidly, and that was more suited to my interests. So that I wanted to become a medical missionary who was a surgeon, and so with that I did a surgical residency at Harlem Hospital and at Howard University's Freeman's Hospital. It was there that I met a Nigerian student who let me know there was an opportunity in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, for medical missionary work. And so, based upon all of that, I decided I would start off by having my life dream come true and go to Port Harcourt, Nigeria, right after the Biafran Civil War. And it was there in 1970 that I went to Port Harcourt, Nigeria for 9 months. And there I lost 40 pounds. So I then began to wonder if Africa was suited for me.
And when you were in Nigeria, were you caring for the local people, or were you doing surgery, or what was the focus?
I did a number of surgeries, and when I wasn't operating, I would go into the community and actually speak to them about learning what Christianity was all about and what Christ was about.
So after your experience in Africa, why did you decide to work in transplantation surgery?
Well, after I lost 40 pounds in 9 months in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, I began to wonder if perhaps Africa was not for me. And so I came back to Howard University Freedman's Hospital. And at Freedman's Hospital, they had the National Institutes of Health people who were giving opportunities to have fellowships in different specialties. And because my initial effort in Africa resulted in losing 40 pounds, and I was like a skeleton when I came back, I thought maybe it might be good to explore another field. And so I decided to try what was available in transplantation, because this was in 1971. And it was a new field. Transplant was a relatively new field. And so if I wasn't going to be a medical missionary, I thought this would be an exciting field because it was more challenging than general surgery. And so I then decided to go back to Africa for another 3 months, lost 20 pounds and got malaria, and decided that maybe transplant was a field for me. So I went to the University of Minnesota between 1971 1973 and learned how to become a transplant surgeon.
So this sounds like this was the circumstances that led you to establish the kidney and liver transplant center at Howard University Hospital. Is that kind of what led up to that?
Yes, after I finished my training with Dr. Najiri and Dr. Simmons, I came back to Howard University and started the transplant program in 1973. We did our first transplants in 1974, and because we were very successful, I then took a time out to do training at the University of Pittsburgh with Dr. Tom Starzl, learning how to do liver transplants. So we then did kidney and liver transplants at Freedman's Hospital. We were the first to start liver transplantation in the District of Columbia, based upon everything I learned at the University of Pittsburgh. So this is how the transplant program began.
And so talk about the research that you conducted to ensure more successful organ transplants. This was a new era and a new field. What was the kind of research that you did?
We did a number of research efforts. One was on how to try to prevent organs from rejecting. Some of those were unsuccessful. We did that nonetheless. And then the area that became my research that really changed things around was when we recognized that African Americans were unlikely to be donors for transplantation. There was research that showed that 70% of the people on dialysis in the United States, especially in the southeastern part of the United States, were African Americans, and far less than 10% were donors. And because of that shortage, since I was the only African American transplant surgeon since Stan Kuntz, the first African American transplant surgeon, died, they came to me and asked me to see what I could do to change things around. And so, because they ran out of funds, I went to Howard University and asked them for for $500. And that $500, we did research that identified what were the reasons why African Americans were reluctant to become donors. Out of that initial effort, we developed a special program that went to the Black community, educate and empower them to become donors. This was major because at the time African Americans were at the bottom of the donor list. And so from that time, from 1982 up until 2000, African Americans were at the bottom of the list. Because of the research we did, we developed a program. First the BC Organ Donor Program, and then eventually the National Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program. And what these programs did was to take African Americans from the bottom of the donation list to the point where actually in 2010, between 2010 and 2017, African Americans were the ethnic group, had more donors than any other ethnic group in the United States. We were number one, African Americans were number one, Caucasians were number two, and Latin Americans were number three.
Very impressive. And this was what year?
This was actually between 2010 and 2017. We had gone from the bottom to the top.
Did the involvement and education about transplantation and donation, did that kind of begin to extend, as you said, to other minorities? Is that correct?
Well, actually, we started with in DC, with the African American community. But because of our success in the African American community, we used what we learned in the African American community to take to all ethnic groups. And our MOTEP, the National Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program, involved all minority groups and educated and empowered them in their own unique ways for each minority group. Because what is successful in the African American population isn't necessarily as successful in the Latino and Hispanic population, which isn't necessarily as effective in the Native American population and in the Filipino population of Hawaii. And so we catered our education effort to the different minorities so that they would be successful in their own ways. And what we did was we got people from each minority group to take this effort to their own group and identify how each minority group would identify ways to increase donation and transplantation rates. And we found this was eminently successful. And the proof of the pudding was in what happened to minority donation rates, which at the time we started were about 15%. And now we're talking about close to 50%. And actually, we're talking about the minority population actually represents about 30%. And actually, on transplant waiting lists, we represent more than 60%. But because of the impact, we went from 15% when we started, we're now up to 30. More than 30% of the donors are from minorities. So that what started in the African American community expanded to all of the minority communities.
And is MOTEP, that's what you referred to, this program, is that still existing? Has it evolved? Is it continuing to?
Well, yes, it is, but it's different today because between 1993 and 2010, we were given about $16 million from the federal government, from the National Institutes of Health, to go across the United States to educate and empower different minority groups. Once that money left, it became more difficult to do. And so when we started off, we had close to 20 to 25 sites, and we now are down to 7 sites because of the lack of resources.
So another area that you've been involved with as part of transplantation and donation is the allocation of available organs. So talk a little bit about how why it was necessary to reform the way available organs are allocated on the national and local levels, and what changes have occurred?
I'm very pleased to report that when we first started off, there was inequitable allocation, mostly because there was racial discrimination. The allocation was distributed based upon the antigens that were found in the white population. And those of us in the African American population were less likely to receive organs because of the system that was used. Because of my participation over the years, that has changed. And we now are in a situation where we are very close to equitable allocation because the barriers to equitable allocation have been removed because of the important work of UNOS and the Division of Transplantation, HRSA, because they played a major role in eliminating the racial discriminatory barriers that made it difficult for African Americans to get transplants.
And is this now true both on the local level and state level and national, or is there kind of a...
This is a national effort now because what existed initially was a national effort. And that racial discriminatory national effort has been eliminated. So that at this point today, locally, regionally, and nationally, we have one system, UNOS, United Network for Organ Sharing. And because of the work of UNOS and Division of Transplant and HRSA, we now have a system that is very close to equitable allocation. So I'm pleased to say that partially because of my efforts and others, and because of UNOS and Division of Transplantation, the obstacles to equitable, many of the obstacles to equitable allocation have been done away with. So that now we have a situation where the waiting times are now more equitable, and minorities receive transplants more often than they did in the past. And so we have data now that identifies and recognizes that minorities are more likely to get transplanted now than ever before.
One other question, since this program is Aging Matters, that would be helpful to hear you talk about, is the new role of older adults insofar as donating their organs and being the recipients of transplantation. In your career, have you seen many changes insofar as the role of older adults in both of those areas?
Yes, I've seen us understand more about the difference between older donors and younger donors. And there are things about younger donors that make them very attractive in the sense that their organs are less associated with rejection. Older organs may not last as long, and they may be associated with more rejection. But it is clear that most of the organs that we get certainly are from adults, and we are getting more older donors than we've ever had before. And there are pros and cons from each group. There's younger recipients, for example, are more likely to reject, but their organs are less likely to be rejected. Older people who get transplanted are less likely to reject, but the organs they donate are more likely to be rejected. And so as we gain more knowledge, we understand more about how we should allocate organs and what groups are best associated with rates, transplant rates, and what groups are not.
One other question that we often hear is about someone who dies and may have had some kind of a disease like hepatitis. Is it more likely nowadays that organs can be acceptable even if the person had some kind of a disease, say like hepatitis? What would you tell us?
This is exactly the case. We now have effective treatment for hepatitis C, for example, which we never had before. We now have treatment that is 95% successful in eradicating hepatitis C. Therefore, we can use donors from people who had hepatitis C. We also are learning, even with HIV, that there are circumstances under which we can use organs from certain HIV patients. So that we are learning more and more about what we can do with organs that had been infected. Now, the real problem is that the shortage of donors is the #1 problem in transplantation today. And this forces us to try to take advantage of any opportunity to use organs that in the past were not utilizable. That's why we have situations in which we have shared. Sometimes we have a donor from somebody who is not compatible with the living relative, and so you then share that with somebody from somebody who is not a relative, who can then be a donor. And this peer donation is another technique we use to try to expand the donor pool. But the #1 problem is the shortage of donors. And as a consequence, 22 people die every single day because of this shortage.
We're getting close to the end of the program, but I just wanted to ask you, first of all, you've mentioned some changes. Do you see any other kinds of changes in the field of organ donation and transplantation in the future, not only for African Americans, but for all donors and recipients, besides what you've already talked
yes.
about?
I believe that regenerative medicine, with the fact that we will eventually be able to grow organs, will become something. We also will be able to transplant organs from other species. I think that those two things will make a difference, because it is clear to me that we will never have enough organs from humans unless we take advantage of the regenerative medicine, including stem cell transplantation. Because with stem cell transplantation, you can see the eradication of diabetes with BET cell transplants, islet cell transplants, and other types of transplants, growing organs, stem cell transplantation. I think that's the future, and getting organs from other species, likely to be the pig. But that's where the future lies, because I think right now we don't have enough human donors. And so learning how to grow organs, learning how to regenerate organs, and using stem cells are the way of the future that will transform, so that right now we have more than 100,000 people on transplant waiting lists. But every year we get probably close to 40,000 transplants. So you can see that wide disparity between those who donate and those who receive. So in the future, getting other resources to supply organs will be the way we overcome this huge problem.
In summary, Dr. Callender, how would you summarize your career and your life's work?
Well, I think I've been very blessed to see in my lifetime, for example, almost the elimination of inequitable organ allocation, #1. #2, to see that African Americans who they said would not donate actually have gone from the bottom to the top. So in my lifetime, I've seen two enormous things. They said blacks wouldn't donate, and it's clear now that that is not the case. If you go to communities, educate and empower them, regardless of their ethnicity, they will donate. And so I've seen equitable allocation with racial discrimination to be moved out of the way so that we can have equitable allocation. So these are two enormous things that have occurred in my life that I contributed mightily to both. So I think I've been blessed to be part of a success story that I would never have thought possible.
Well, I certainly want to thank you for joining me today and for being my guest.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my story.
Well, again, I want to thank Dr. Clive Callender for joining me today. And I hope this Stories of Life episode has been enlightening and may inspire you to think in new ways about your own life experiences. This program is broadcast Sundays at 5:30 p.m. and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. on Comcast Channel 69 or Verizon Channel 38 in Arlington, Virginia, or streaming live at those times on arlingtonmedia.org. Aging Matters is also on the radio. The program is broadcast every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on WERA-LP Arlington, 96.7 FM. And be sure to check out the Aging Matters website, agingmattersonline.com, for more information about all of our radio programs and TV episodes. Thank you for watching the program today. Please join me again for the next Aging Matters show. And until then, remember, age is just a number, not a label.